Hey everybody, welcome to the Power of Connection Chat. I'm your host, Bobby Umer, and I'm here with Kunal Gupta, who's the CEO of Polar. It's a digital company, and he's also a mindfulness teacher as well as a mental health advocate. Welcome, Kunal. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, Bobby. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. I've known Kunal for a long time, way back in the day when I was speaking at the Impact national conferences, and I've kind of watched your career like take off and go to amazing, crazy heights, which has been great. So I'm really glad to be able to catch you at this time and be able to have some great conversation with you. And I want to let everyone know, that who are on the call, I was actually inspired by an email that he sent, just talking about the challenges of going through COVID and the overwhelm and the mental challenges, and just the fact that people are breaking down and crying, and it's a real thing that we're all dealing with. And that letter really moved me, and I emailed you back saying, man, that was really, really powerful. And so that was the root of the inspiration for me to, hey, I need to get you on my show and then talk to you about stuff. And we're going to talk about other things as well. For those who are just joining us, the Power of Connection broadcasts every Mondays and Wednesdays around 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we talk about topics that I care about, things like entrepreneurship, leadership, personal branding, thought leadership, networking, connection, and things like that. But I also bring on guests to bring their own kind of expertise around the things that they care about. And if you are joining us, say hello. Let us know where you're calling in from. Is it North America, South America, Australia, Asia, Europe? We'd love to hear from you. And you can also start asking questions. The topic today is really about what we call productivity. We are not what we do, right? Productivity is not the name of the game here. It's about trying to. Actually, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk more about who are we beyond what we do and our productivity. And I think it's something that we want to kind of dive into a little bit more. So. And it looks like people are saying hello. Simon saying, hey, Bob. Steven saying, hey, Bobby. Zishan says, hey, Bobby. And he says, Kunal, looking good. That's good. We both remember Zishan, right? The photographer. He does more stuff now, but at the time, he's there. Well, anyways, thank you so much for joining us. So just feel free to join in. And if you like what you're hearing, you can like, clap, heart, light bulb, happy face, all that kind of stuff. You can get on your phones and click away, type questions. You can share on your own page. You can tag people, join the conversation. We'd love to have people join us. So now let's start with you in terms of tell us a bit about kind of your story. Your story is a great one. I really love it. But kind of where you were and kind of how you came to be in terms of where you are with your work in your life.
Sure. I mean, there's so many dimensions to who we are, and then we're going to talk about that. I'll share with you, I guess, two dimensions to it. So the first is professionally. So like Bobby, we met probably like 15 years ago. I was a kid back then, organizing student conferences and talking about entrepreneurship. And then I finished school at Waterloo and decided to go into entrepreneurship. This was at a time before entrepreneurship was cool, but a dozen years ago. And started a company. I knew nothing. Now I know that I don't know very much, which has helped me a lot. And the company works in the digital media space. I've had the privilege of having clients around the world. We have about 120 clients in 20 countries and 4 offices. And I'm grateful as well to not be going on planes at this time and to be grounded. Business has gone through lots of ups and downs, as any entrepreneurial venture does. I hit a point probably about 6-7 years ago, about halfway into my entrepreneurial journey so far, where we had achieved quite a bit of success in the conventional sense with the business, but I wasn't feeling satisfied or fulfilled in a way that I'd expected to. And that kickstarted, call it a second, more important aspect of my identity and my journey, which is really an introspective one, and one where I started to look inside versus outside for answers. And that process continues now, 6-7 years later. It's led me to become passionate about mental health. It's helped me become proficient and skilled with meditation as a practice, in which I now teach. But then more broadly, really creating the space to reflect about life, to reflect about society, to reflect about the world, and then letting insights come up from those reflections that have, permeated my everyday. And then lately, I've been thinking a lot about this notion of productivity, and then its relationship to our identity.
No, I think it's a really interesting thing about how we identify or have an identity around productivity, or being busy or creating impact. And I often use that as a definition of leadership in terms of influencing and creating impact. And so I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on that. As I asked many of our audience, our guests on the show, can you tell us a bit about kind of how you're dealing with the whole COVID situation? It's been a couple months now. Kind of share some of your thoughts, or what's going on with you personally, and how you're dealing with it.
Yeah, so I live in New York, but I moved back to Canada. Really grateful to be Canadian at a time like this, and decided to be in Canada for the pandemic. And I was like really sprinting. I was sprinting really hard the first 4 or 5 weeks, and it was warranted. Health crisis triggered an economic crisis. Our businesses in the digital advertising industry, which is kind of the first to be hit when companies face uncertainty. The first thing they do is they stop spending money on advertising. Right. Our businesses actually continue to grow despite the macro challenges. I think it's a testament to how big the market is and how small we are, and that we've been on a growth curve as of late. I was sprinting really hard, and that made sense for probably the first 4 weeks. But then that became my habit, and then I just kept sprinting into week 5 and 6 and 7, and then by week 8, I felt fully burnt out and exhausted mentally, emotionally, even physically. And I took a 4-day weekend. It was my mom's birthday, so that was like the excuse I gave myself that I wanted to just be fully present, and it was a milestone birthday for her. So organized lots of virtual birthday parties and all that. And then I realized that weekend, taking a moment to breathe and to pause, that I had been sprinting when really at that moment it was clear this is a marathon. So we did a couple of things. So we instituted wellness days for our team. So every other week, it's a 4-day work week for our team and myself. And that's really to create some space to take care of ourselves. We've asked everyone to take a wellness week over the summer. You can't go anywhere. You probably aren't going to go anywhere, but taking time away from the day-to-day routines is helpful. And then we've done lots of tactical things like cutting off meetings at 30 minutes and no meetings after 1 p.m. and cutting Slack usage in half, and like doing a lot of things that would probably be the opposite of what you'd expect when companies go remote. Would be the opposite of productivity, but they're all things that have really helped me and have helped the team. And yes, we've got more done for sure with this new setup.
And I think it's a great idea. And one of the things that I've been doing actually is I have a startup now called DYPB, Discovery Personal Brand. And again, a lot of COVID really affected tremendously because we were doing live events and in-house trainings, which now no longer we can do. And so we had to kind of relook at how are we going to navigate things. But one of the things we did incorporate was a weekly group coaching call. So basically, I invite anyone on the team to join me for an hour, and they can talk about whatever they want, any sort of things they're challenged with or things they want to learn, and I just kind of take people through just a kind of a group coaching session, which I think has been really helpful to people. I love the idea of giving people some incentive to take time off. I think that's really great. So I think that's really awesome. Can you tell us a bit more about how does this identity that you talk about, how does it get ingrained in our heads? Why is it that people are creating identity around the productivity?
Yeah, so a lot of this comes down to the culture that we've created. On productivity in the time of the pandemic, you'll see lots of news stories and articles and social media posts of how companies and teams are more productive during the pandemic and work from home. I don't buy any of it. I don't think it's actually true. And this is me as a CEO saying that. And my own team as well. And here's the thing. There's a difference between being productive and working a lot. Right. People are working a lot, because we're generally connected. We welcome the distraction from some of the troubling news of the world, and there's no constraints and stops to the days or the weeks. So people are working a lot. People are busy, but that's not the same thing as being productive.
Yeah.
When I think of productivity, I think of effectiveness. I think of working on important things and doing them efficiently versus being super like inefficient because I have to work so much to get something done, which is what I observe and see a lot of. That's why we've made a lot of changes in our team. So I think there's another aspect, which is at a time when there's literally like 50 million people between the US, UK, Canada alone that are out of a job. It's not a very wise thing to say that I'm less productive right now. It's not good for job security.
Right.
It's very good for job security to think or to project an image of productivity. So I think it's, I raise this as a way for us to check ourselves. And I think it's totally fine to be less productive. That's the culture I want to introduce and nurture and model. Like this is a really tough time for the world, a tough time for our families and different setups. And I think we should reset our expectations. And the expectations should be around taking care of what's important. There are important things in business. There's a lot more important things in the world and our personal lives and the health of those around us that we know and don't know. And all of that is important. So we have to think of productivity as multifaceted and not a single dimension of based on how many hours I'm working.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, in fact, there was a recent press conference with the Prime Minister and his ministers, and they talked about the fact that instead of calling it working from home and struggling to work from home, let's call it what it is for many people, which is we're at home, staying at home during a pandemic crisis, dealing with our domestic situations, our kids, homeschooling our kids, and taking care of our families, and in doing so, trying to get some work done. That's my reality. The truth is, before this had hit, I would work. I'd send the kids off to school, and then I would work, and then they come home at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and I'd have dinner, and then there you go. And as an entrepreneur, sometimes I work in the evenings, maybe on the weekends, but not as much because I'm a doting dad. But as soon as this hit, a lot of my time is spent with the kids. Like I transition with them. They're from one class to the next class online. They come back to me with 10 questions every couple hours. Like it's constant interruption. So I'm actually working less, and so I have to figure out ways to be more effective with my time. But yeah, the truth is, working from home, I mean, it is very, very challenging. And there are some days where I maybe get an hour or two done, and other days I might get as high as 5. But I like that shift of perspective to say that you don't think of it as working from home, because you're going to start all of a sudden relating your productivity to how little it is, and I think that can be a challenge.
Yeah. I mean, picking, like for me, what I've been doing, today's a Monday, so this morning I just wrote down 3 things that I want to focus on this week.
Okay.
And there are 3 important things. You would think as a CEO I should have a list of 30 things, and I do have like long to-do lists and things that I should and need to get to. But I just picked 3 things. It's like, okay, if I can get these 3 things, these 3 big things done this week, I'm going to be satisfied.
Right. Well, once you do this interview, that'll be one of the 3, and then man,
yeah, exactly.
No, that's great. I think that's a really good tip for that. In terms of helping people out, and again, if you're just joining us, I'm talking to Kunal Gupta about productivity, and we're more than what we do, and how we want to maybe change our mindset around productivity. And if you're joining us, comment, ask questions. I see Dean joined us. Hey, Bob, that's great. Join us, comment, tag people, be part of the conversation. Ask questions. Kunal's here to answer some great questions. He's got a lot of great insights into mindfulness and meditation as a CEO, and that's something that, again, very foreign to me, because I'm not a meditation guy at all. So I think that's it's really helpful information for people to have. When it comes to the productivity, though, you were mentioning about how companies are not really, I guess they're not being authentic or transparent about it. Why is that? Are you more? I understand individuals not being authentic about it because they're worried about their losing their job. But our company's not doing a good enough job, and can they be more transparent about saying, listen, it's okay, we get it.
Yeah, that's what's needed from leadership is to acknowledge that yes, the realities like the government example you gave, like these are the realities of the situation. We see it. We're not blind to it. We're not trying to just bring what we did offline online now in a distributed way and try and pretend like nothing has happened. And frankly, the same thing goes for the events that are unfolding right now in the U.S. Like it's a social and civic crisis that's turning into civic unrest. But like I had a team meeting, like as leaders, we have to be willing to talk about it and to acknowledge the many elephants in the room. And it feels like every week or every other week, there's a new elephant in the room. If it's on people's minds, then it's our job as leaders to address it and to say, it's on my mind as well. Here's how I think about it. Here's some ideas for you. And let me know what you think. Let me know if there's other stuff on your mind that we should at least just acknowledge, if nothing
Yeah,
else.
yeah. I think a lot of leaders fear saying anything because they don't want to be political, and they don't want to turn off people. I think that if you can still be empathetic, say, listen, I care that people are struggling and people are suffering. I wish that there wasn't as much violence going on. I wish there wasn't as much oppression going on. I think everyone can relate to that. And you know what? We're here. Let's talk about it because it's been on my mind and it's been weighing heavily on me. So yeah, like what's going on in the U.S. and particularly with all the civil unrest is really jarring. And as someone myself, who's a person of color, a lot of my friends I posted about this actually on Facebook, my friends. But one of the things is I talked about while I'm a person of color and I have and there's certainly the issue of white privilege and a lot of white privilege that's out there. But there's also I have privilege too. I have privilege of being a man. I have privilege of being a big person. I have privilege even though I'm a brown guy. It's not. This experience hasn't been the same for my black friends. I've dealt with racial stuff my whole life. I really have. I can remember. We all remember the first time we dealt with some sort of racism even when we were kids. I remember the first time someone called me N-word. I remember the first time someone made fun of my color. But the big difference that I have seen is that I don't think in my lifetime as a person of color, I've never felt that my life was in danger. I may have felt that I was scared or something, but I never felt my life was in danger. And so that to me is something just extremely jarring and scary and sad. And I think we should acknowledge that it's there for many of the people who are suffering and struggling this way. And I think that's why they're, even during a time of pandemic and social isolation, they're stepping up and getting out there and trying to I guess I could express how they're feeling and try to create some change, and it's just really it's a very mind blowing thing to witness. And I'm also just my heart is really heavy around what's going on. So I thought I'd just take time to say that. And what were your thoughts on what's going on?
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I feel it. I hear you. I was up till midnight last night, soaking it in and watching the news and talking to some friends. I wrote about this yesterday morning, and it was called The Desire to Change. Really, like it's. I feel really sad. I feel really disheartened by what's happening, and that for me provoked me to reflect more deeply on the many inequalities that we're witnessing in society. So this is being sparked by a racial inequality. I think very like close tidely to it is an income inequality, and that's going in the opposite direction. That's getting worse and worse. And a recession where you have 50 million people within these three countries that I know well out of a job. That's going to be really rough for income inequality and what that's going to do on a medium-term basis. Forget even the short term. You've got a climate crisis that affects some people more than others, even though it's caused by all of us. You've got gender pay gaps and promotion gaps in the workplace. You've got a mental health crisis, and if you look at death by suicide rates, it's not equal across different age and racial and geo and gender, and there's a lot of inequality that happens across all of these dimensions. So I've been reflecting about this over the last couple of days, and really I think this comes down to values. There's a question of values, and where do our values come from? And our really it's a call to bring more intentionality to the values that we practice and the values that we share. I think every exchange we have with each other, we're sharing a bit of ourselves and that our values. And it's important to be mindful, to be aware, to be intentional of the values we're absorbing and the values that we've inherited and the values that we're sharing. And I think the change, like the desire, the strong desire I feel for change, like in the world, starts in me and starts in the values, my own values, and how I see the world. And through that, what I'm basically calling for is through the inner shift in values and the inner shift in thinking that'll change how we all show up. And through that, we'll be able to change the world and address a lot of these inequalities that are that we're not willing to tolerate anymore. And the weekend was an example of that.
I love that you mentioned values. I mean, that's something that I always talk about being, because people always ask me, what you call yourself a heart leader? What does that mean? I said, well, I lead with my values of love, affection, kindness, empathy, and things like that. That's what being a heart leader is. Values are also a big part of personal branding, which I'm a huge advocate for as well, to help people find more alignment and clarity in their lives. And so values, I think, is a great way to go. I think too often it gets lost. Our values get lost, so we don't realize what they are or how we express them. But you did bring up something else that also I think is a challenge. I mean, certainly, some major issues that we have. One, of course, is the racial disparity, and there's also the income gap. And those are probably two of the biggest drivers that concern me, because I think during this COVID crisis, I'm seeing big companies like Amazon and Google, and they're making a ton of money, and all the small shops and entrepreneurs like myself are being squeezed out. And not that I'm being squeezed out, but I mean other entrepreneurs are being squeezed out, and I think that's going to create even more of an income gap. But you also brought a ton of other things too. Like I think there's an education gap, there's a wage gap, there's a gender gap. So I think the big challenge is, so one is, sure, let's try to understand our values and speak for our values and try to create that change. But then the second part that I think is the bigger challenge, that when one is overwhelmed with all these different things, and this even relates to productivity, right? I have all these things I got to do just for my business, for my family, right? And even for my health. Because since during COVID, I gained 20 pounds because I'm not eating and not being healthy anymore. So like all these things I got to do, and when you get overwhelmed with tons to do, you end up not doing as much or doing little. Similarly, when you have so many different societal and economic challenges, right? And I mean, we can go on and on with like healthcare, gun control, the voting systems, the gerrymandering. There's just so much stuff, right? It's overwhelming. So the question I think becomes, then where do we start? And I think that's where people struggle.
Yeah. Just hearing you recite how many challenges or changes or inequalities there are, it does feel overwhelming. It does feel intimidating. But what I'd offer is the understanding that everything changes. So everything is changing. And the question is it changing in a direction that's aligned with our values and beliefs, or is it changing in a direction that's the opposite of our values and beliefs? So something like the gender pay gap and promotion gap, that is changing. That's getting better. I'm just getting impatient about it, but it is getting better. It's going in a good direction, and it's something that everybody agrees on. Things like income inequality, though, are going in the opposite direction. Like the difference between the rich and the poor is getting bigger. The middle class is disappearing. So that's something that it's going to require a bigger change. A more structural change. But to more directly answer your question, where to start, really it starts by looking inwards. My view is looking inwards and asking ourselves each, what do we care most about? What do we really, really value? And if we have to boil it down to one thing, what is that right now? It doesn't have to be what it was. It doesn't have to be what it will be. It can change. I do believe our values and beliefs can change, because we all need different things at different times in our journey.
Yeah.
And being very clear with ourselves, this is really, really important to me. Then it's really about reflecting that value through our day-to-day actions and choices.
And I think that to that point, things that we care about, the first things that always come to my mind is, my family and my health, right? And, taking care of myself, physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever it might be. my family, my kids, my parents, like all these sort of people, my friends, the people that are suffering. I think that at the end of the day, if we focus on trying to be, better for the people that we care about as values as well as our own health, I think then we can look at all these things that we just talked about and say, well, this is why it has to change because we don't want to have this income gap. We don't want to have this gender equality. We want to, because at the end of the day, I find that most of them are rooted, like in terms of the positive change we seek, is rooted in the idea of having better, taking care of our families and that's something everyone we all can align with. We all want to, like, no one's gonna say, well, I don't want my family to be better. I think we all want our families to be better off, right? And that can be a unifying factor that everyone I think can get behind when they look at these things.
Yeah. And I think what becomes beautiful, and this has been part of my experience through mindfulness practices, is like the definition of family starts to expand. And I start to expand beyond myself, beyond those around me. It involves different communities, and then expands to ideally include like the entire world. And I know that's a big ask, but this idea of, I use the word the self, then expanding the view of self to extend broader and broader and broader. And if I see you as part of me, then I'm not going to want to hurt you because I'm hurting me. And to take that mindset and that attitude towards the whole world is ultimately, I think, the journey. I mean, that's the work.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And if you're just joining us, we're talking to Kunal Gupta about productivity, and we are more than what we do. And it's turned into a little bit of a philosophical discussion too about the world currently, and there's a lot of stuff going on that the world's in crisis, and so we're kind of diving deep into that. So I appreciate creating an environment with you, Kunal, where we can actually share this stuff. So I appreciate that. I want to steer it back to the topic because this is great. I could talk to you about this. I could talk to you and other people about this for hours and hours and hours. And it's actually something I miss. Like one of the things I miss my friends. I really miss the deep discussions I have with them because I'm spending a lot of my time with my kids talking about the Avengers, and I'm talking about bunnies, and I'm talking about plants. And I'm not having the deep conversation that I want. And so I don't want to burn my kids with it. So it's nice to have these conversations. Going back to the title, and again, if you are joining us, ask questions. If you want to ask questions, you totally can. And we had a comment from, let's see here, from Serena. Yeah, so important. Leadership plays a huge role, and I agree. Now's not the time for leaders to stay quiet. So she agrees with kind of your idea on that one, but stepping up and saying something, I think that's really important. But let's go to the other thing, which is, you talk about we are more than what we do, right? So maybe talk a bit about, okay, if we're more than what we do, then what are those things?
Yeah. So living in New York for the last couple of years, it became very clear to me that it's very much like American culture. When I met somebody new, be it at a conference, be it at a yoga class, be it even on a date, like if I meet somebody new, the first question is, what do you do?
Right.
And I'm really proud of what I do, but I hate that question because what it creates the space for is if I don't like what you do, then I don't like you. Or if I don't understand what you do, then I don't understand you. And I definitely had those moments in those situations. Like what I do is pretty like nuanced. It's a niche digital media B2B company. I don't need most people to understand what I do. But then it goes down this path of trying to understand and dissect what I do, which is not even that relevant to the context of us connecting as human beings. But what I did notice is it's very American to ask what you do. It's very like Canadian though, and British to ask like, where are you from?
No, what do you do, eh?
Yeah.
Where are you from? Okay, interesting.
And it's which part of the country, where did you grow up, and trying to establish some form of connection. And then I think in this time of lockdown, what's been really interesting is we don't spend as much time in how we appear. I mean, you look great, Bobby. We don't, just have to say that before I say the next part. But like, we're not spending all this time like getting dressed up and haircuts and makeup and yeah. If you think of how much time, probably money as well, we invest in how we physically look, then now we've stripped that away and it's causing a deeper question. And then we're also not how we play in the sense of the activities that we engage with. I don't use Instagram, but I imagine the Instagram feeds are pretty like boring right now because nobody's going anywhere and doing call it more unique or extreme activities. It's been kind of like this equalizer, this balancing, function. So we're not like what we do. We're not where we're from. We're not how we look. We're not how we play. So if you strip all of this away, then who are we? Like, what's left? And I don't have an answer for you. It's more I'm just sharing the process, right. The steps is to like strip away all of these dimensions and then ask yourself, who am I? And that might be difficult. That might be difficult to sit with. That might be difficult to understand. But in there, if we each sit with that question, there's some treasures and there's some real insight.
Yeah, I love that. I think for me, I've always brought back to my definition on leadership, which is we are what we influence. And so for me, when I think of being a father, influencing my children, my health, influencing my weight journey, my friends, my parents, my business. To me, I look at that. I look at what kind of influence am I having? Is it positive or negative? What kind of impact? What's my story? What's my legacy? These are things that I think about, and some of them are based on what I do, but some of them also based on who I am, what I believe, what I stand for, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's an important thing. And what's also interesting, I thought I'd point out is, and people are asking a question, which we'll get to in a second. When we met way back in the day, one of the first things I used to talk about at those conferences was authentic networking and connection. And I would tell people, instead of asking people what they do, you should ask them more deeper probing questions. And so, well, what kind of questions? Well, like one question I like to ask is, what do you stand for? And I would often, or what are your three biggest values? Because when you do that, then you get some interesting conversations. Because I'll say I stand for equality and fairness and compassion. That's what I stand for. And that turns into some incredibly deeper discussion than I'm a bank executive or I'm an accountant. Like that's not as deep, right? Yeah. And I think that's a great way to start a beautiful, connected conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'll throw a few more to that have come up for me in this context, like in this time. One is asking the question, when was the last time you cried?
Wow.
And like Bobby referenced it earlier, but like I wrote an entire post called The Art of Crying. So I'm out of the closet, so to speak. Like I cry almost every day or every other day. And it's a very healthy process. And I talk about in my essay basically of why we need to cry and how to cry. But I think in asking that question, we create the space for emotion. Another one is, what has this time in lockdown taught you about yourself? Which gets into identity. Is what have you learned about yourself? And that's fascinating, some of the responses that I've received back from it. But these are all ways to connect beyond what it is we do or where we are or what we look like.
And given that it is going to be a marathon, I think that that's probably a good time spent. So I appreciate that. We have some questions here. So Sarah says, thank you so much for leading a call and bringing up such important topics to today's society. Awesome, thank you. And if you're joining us, ask questions. This is great. Sarah also asks, how are you coping with the idea that we don't know when this is going to end?
I'm going to try and be brief on this because I can talk a lot on this.
Me too. There's so much there.
I believe that we are in year 0 and that this is not the end, like this is the start.
Yeah.
And this is the start, and we've given the space to be intentional about the choices we want. Like a lot of people fear that we don't go back to normal. I hope that we don't go back to normal. No, because normal like might have been okay for like Bobby and me, but normal was not great for the majority of people. We talked about all the inequalities, and that's being like really exposed right now in this time to all of us. So we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to each other to treat this as the start of a new chapter in the journey for humanity. versus like a blip or a mistake or a forgotten era where let's pretend this never happened and go back to what was.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, I appreciate that. I love the idea that two things you kind of struck me. One is we're at year zero. And number two, that you don't want to go back to it. I agree in many areas in that way. I hope speaking comes back, but because I love to be on stage in front of people, but I do agree that things are going to change. And one of the things that I've been talking about, because I've been so busy, I haven't had a chance to blog as much as other people have. But I've had this blog in my head for ages, which is the three things I'm dealing with is uncertainty, right? We don't know what's going to happen next week, next month, next year. And on top of that, as soon as we have something happen 2 weeks, like just a week ago, there was issues around the bubble for Mother's Day because people weren't social distancing, and now there's going to be another bubble with people going outside doing all the weather, and all the people are complaining about staying at home. And now and then 2 weeks later, something could happen a week before that changes everything. So similarly, we now have this week civil unrest, and we don't know what that's going to affect things. So it's very difficult. The other issue is what I call overwhelm, right? So there's an overwhelm of work, there's an overwhelm of information, an overwhelm of misinformation, and we don't know how to. It's hard to process all of it. And the third piece is really the mental health piece, which I think is going to be a huge, huge aspect of how we live and breathe, work and life moving forward. We're all going to be dealing with this, like I'm dealing with this with myself and my kids, and I'm usually a pretty resilient guy at being an entrepreneur and a parent, but I can tell you that, I don't have any bad days, but I do have bad hours, and I try to navigate those as best I can. So, and I think there's even a fourth one, which is kind of under the mental health thing, which is the anger that we're now seeing, the frustrations being put out there, and it's a lot to deal with, and so I think it's important for us to understand that we don't know when it's going to end, so we have to go day by day, month by month, and just plan for this new world. Because I do think it is a new world. There's another expression I heard someone say: "It's not the new normal; it's the now normal." And what's going to happen after that? Because the now normal today will be a now normal that's different in a month or in 3 months. Certain things aren't going to go back the way it was. As a speaker, I can tell you I don't anticipate speaking to go back the way it was. There may be live events, but they'll be few and far between. I'm thinking more 80%, 80-20 from virtual to live. And the other thing is it'll take time to bring back the trust, because like another industry that's been totally decimated is performing arts, right? So because you can't get 30 people on stage doing Lion King, nor can you get 500 people or 1,000 people in a room close knit together to watch the show, because they're not comfortable. It'll take at least 2 years of an all clear status with a vaccine and all that kind of stuff where people feel comfortable, and eventually theater may come back. But then who's going to survive? Just the big companies, not the small ones. So again, it's going to take a while to fix that. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. So I think we're going to have to watch and see and call out what we think is good and then call what we think is bad.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting note on the idea of trust, and that just for me sparked, how is trust going to be created between human beings in peer-to-peer connections? We totally underestimate the importance of physical connection, in-person connection. There's so many subtle body cues and tone. There's so much that we pick up that influences the establishment of trust between two people. The conversation we're having right now, it's a deep conversation, but I've known you for 15 years.
Yeah, we haven't talked about much.
We haven't been close through the 15 years, but there is a level of trust.
Absolutely.
At a time when I was younger and probably more impressionable, I would bet that this conversation wouldn't be this deep if you and I were meeting for the first time today.
Sure, absolutely.
So then the question becomes, how do we establish trust, past year zero, knowing it's going to have to look different than what we've known?
There's another question from Margarita who says, what coping strategies help you manage stress?
Yeah. Meditation, and then meditation broadly is mindfulness. So Bobby, you said that you don't meditate?
I have trouble meditating. I shouldn't say I don't meditate. I have trouble meditating.
Okay. Will you humor me and do a short meditation with me right now?
Oh man, live you can't. Well, I can't say no. My audience will kill me. No, I'm kidding. Listen, no, I'm open to it. Yeah, what do you have in mind? Let's do it. We'll get the whole audience involved here.
Let's do it. And if you're watching this like live or recorded, this is the time to meditate with us for a few minutes. So actually, let me just talk about it briefly, and then we'll jump into it.
Sure.
First is meditation's been branded as like not thinking or stopping or controlling our thoughts. It's not that at all. Like meditation is the observation of our thoughts. To have thoughts is the equivalent of breathing. It's what makes us human. So let the thoughts flow. Think of meditation as a practice to become aware of the thoughts versus to stop or control the thoughts. Second tip is to avoid judging ourselves for having thoughts or the contents of the thoughts. And it's really a practice of acceptance. So the first tip is like awareness of what's going on. The second tip is acceptance of whatever we become aware of. And the third is to stay alert, which is to sit up tall, to have an erect spine, to be in a comfortable position, but not in a sleepy position. So to take whatever posture allows us to stay alert. Okay, so let's get into it. So sit up tall, and I generally when I sit for meditation, if I'm sitting on a chair, I sit like halfway up on the chair to avoid back support. So unless you have a back injury, I advise not having back support, and that helps with the third tip to stay more alert.
Right.
Bring your eyes to a close and settle into your body. Relax your jaw. Relax your shoulders, relax your fingers and your toes. Notice the floor under your feet. Notice the chair under your seat. And bring your attention to your body now. Start with your legs. And feel the weight of your legs, your feet, your calves, knees, and thighs. Notice your arms, your hands, forearms, elbows, and upper arms. Notice your torso, your back, your spine, chest, and stomach. And notice your head, your chin and cheeks, your eyes, forehead, and the top of your head. Gently bring your attention now to your breath as you slowly observe each inhale and each exhale. Take a deep inhale and a slow exhale. You can wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes as you slowly open your eyes and come back to your space. Thank you for being open to sharing that. How was that experience for you, Bobby?
Well, first up, there's a first time for everything on my Power Connection show. So there you go. That's the first thing. Um, I've been through things like this before, where we go through the body feelings and things like that. So I understand how that works. Um, it was good. I mean, I definitely felt it in different parts of the body as I was doing it. I think the thing I was trying really hard not to do is don't think of anything else. Don't think of anything else. I'm trying to stay focused because I tend to be someone who thinks about a ton of things, right? And so my mind's kind of buzzing all the time. So I was trying really hard to be in the moment and try to focus on it. So I think that, to your point, if I make it a practice and I do it more often, then I'll be better at it. I have trouble sleeping at night, and so I often try to. Where I read this article that talked about trying to get your eyelids heavy and to close your mind, and I find it very difficult to do it. Like the average person falls asleep in 7 minutes. It takes me about half an hour or longer to fall asleep. So I have trouble with that because my mind's always racing about lots of things. So I think maybe if I exercise this like a muscle, I always say everything's a muscle, right? So empathy is your heart muscle. So mindfulness is a brain muscle if I exercise it, etc. So yeah, I appreciate you for taking me and anyone else through that on the broadcast. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. It is strength training for the mind. Yeah. I have noticed my sleep change considerably once I started to meditate regularly. So I highly, highly recommend it. If nothing else, to help you with sleep.
I appreciate that. And, we were going to end the call, but there's actually another question that someone had here. Serena asked, what are some ways we can integrate wellness and mindfulness into our workplace, especially while working from home?
Yeah.
Great question.
I obsess about this. Yeah. So so I'll just share with you what I do. That's the best I can do. So every morning I have a community meditation. It's at 9:30 Eastern, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. Everybody is welcome to join that. So I lead a live meditation every day at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. I hope, Bobby, you're able to join once in a while. It's like a 15-20 minute practice with friends. So that's a nice start to the day. I'll do my own practice in the morning. But I'll start my workday after that practice at 10 a.m. And that wasn't the case at the start of the lockdown. I'd start working at 7 or 8 a.m. But giving myself some space in the morning has really helped. And then on the other side of it, setting a hard cutoff around 5 p.m., sometimes 4 p.m. for my workday. So I've set that constraint, and that's just in the last 3-4 weeks, and it's really served me really well. The second thing that I've done that's helped is to eat meals in like the kitchen versus like by the computer screen, and just forcing myself to make the space to just eat properly and calmly. That has helped me a lot. Whereas the first 4 weeks, I'd be eating lunch every day while working or on calls, and that wasn't a lot of fun. I try and end calls like 5 minutes before the hour or before the half hour to allow myself a 5-minute like mental break. That's been useful. There is screen fatigue for sure. So where I can, I turn my calls into audio only. And then at times we'll go for a walk in the neighborhood. So I'm finding ways to take meetings over phone calls versus video. Instead of video being the default, only using video when it's actually like important and necessary. So those are a couple of things off the top of my head that have helped me stay focused, stay productive, stay effective, but be very efficient while respecting my own mental health.
And Zishan's asking, how often should you meditate?
You could always be in meditation. I like to think that I am. I think consistency is useful. If you're interested in meditation, consistency is useful. Now, consistency is a personal choice. So for my mom, that could mean once a week. For a friend, that could mean like a best 4 to 7 days in a week. For you, it can mean once a day. For me, it can mean 3 times a day. So I don't think it actually matters the frequency. I think consistency is helpful. It could be once a month. You pick. And you'll know it. You'll just feel into your body, to your mind, to your emotional state to know, how much it feels right.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Kunal. Listen, this has been a really fascinating broadcast and conversation. If people have more questions for Kunal, and maybe, or you can message below, tag us, and maybe you can answer questions here. But in the meantime, how can people reach out to you if they'd like to reach out?
Yeah, my blog is the best way. Findfocus.today. So findfocus.today. I've been publishing an introspection reflection once a week, but then you can find me through the blog as well.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. What a great conversation. We kind of went everywhere, but I think that was really good, and you made it really far more interesting and diverse. So I do appreciate your time, Kunal, for that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and it's been nice to see you after so long.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you, and hopefully I can join other discussions or other meditations and do that. So the rest of you, again, Power Connection broadcasts every Mondays and Wednesdays around 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On Wednesday, join me as I interview Neil Schaefer, and we're going to talk probably about some of his ideas from his book, which is going to be pretty awesome interview. And the rest of you have a wonderful, safe week. Stay connected, stay in touch, stay home, stay safe. And the world is there's a lot to be grateful for. People around you, your own health, and take the time to appreciate that. Will go a long way in dealing with all the things that are on our mind. So thank you so much for that, Kunal, and so long.